So Peter Kent has written a column for the Wall Street Journal. And unfortunately, because there's a paywall, we can't get the full column. But in the portion that I have here, Peter Kent spells out in great detail how Omar Khadr killed an American medic and wounded another medic, and now the Trudeau government has given him $10.5 million. Khadr, that is. The headline reads, "A terrorist's big payday, courtesy of Canada, and the real victims may not be able to collect." Peter Kent's going to join us at 8:15 this morning, but a lot of people asking questions about why federal conservatives are doing the American media tour about Khadr. You may not like it, but it was traveling below the radar in the United States. And this column was published in the Wall Street Journal, which is a favorite of people who work in government and people in influence. It was published on the very same day that the Trump administration filed paperwork to reopen NAFTA. So basically you're saying Canada's a pretty horrible place and the incumbent government's awful. But by the way, with 2.5 years to go, that's the government you can negotiate the new NAFTA agreement with. Before Peter's column was published, and Peter's a friend, but before this column was published in the States, there was almost no mention of Khadr. I've been going over the American media very closely for the last 2 weeks because I thought this was going to blow up. It was going to be ugly in Canada, but it was going to be ugly in the States. And then after Peter published, searches for Khadr's name went up on Google by 700% rise in searches for Omar Khadr. And then Fox got into it.
Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Crime doesn't pay. That's what they tell you in school, though increasingly there's evidence that maybe it does in fact pay. Consider all those career politicians who somehow wind up rich in the end. And then there's Omar Khadr. If Khadr lived on your street, he'd probably be the richest guy in your neighborhood. How did he make his money? Well, first he joined the Taliban. During a firefight with U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan in 2002, Khadr threw a grenade that killed a Delta Force medic named Christopher Speer. For that, he went to Guantanamo Bay. He later pleaded guilty to murder there. Lucky for Khadr, he was born a Canadian citizen. So after being released from Gitmo, he sued the government of Canada for his imprisonment. And here's the remarkable thing. Canada settled with him. This month, Justin Trudeau's government awarded Khadr more than $10 million and issued an official apology for being mean to him. Prime Minister Trudeau later conceded he had not bothered to talk to Christopher Speer's widow before any of this. Instead, he defended the settlement as a win for human rights. Watch.
Toronto's breaking news, traffic and weather. This is More in the Morning on News Talk 1010.
The headline in the Wall Street Journal, an op-ed column. The headline reads, "A terrorist's big payday courtesy of Trudeau." It's by a sitting MP and former cabinet minister, Peter Kent. The final paragraph reads, "Mr. Trudeau's actions," and he refers, of course, to the Canadian government's $10.5 million and apology to Omar Khadr. "Mr. Trudeau's actions are an affront to the memory of Christopher Speer, to Tabitha Speer and her children, to Lane Morris, to our U.S. allies, and to all men and women in uniform. This payout was a cynical subversion of Canadian principles. Mr. Trudeau made Omar Khadr a millionaire, and he didn't have to." Peter Kent himself joins us on the line, MP for Thornhill. Good morning, Peter Kent.
Good morning, John.
Why write this for the Wall Street Journal and not just stake out a position in a Canadian publication?
Well, and certainly I have been talking about it on any number of Canadian media outlets and on social media, but the questions that I was getting from colleagues south of the border about the official government justification, of which Minister Goodale offered with I think in a rather mendacitious way, was incorrect. It was inaccurate, and I think that while certainly I respect, conservatives respect the Charter of Rights, we also respect our friends and neighbors and allies in the war against terror, and I think that the government has completely misrepresented what they did in doing an end run on the judicial process that would have openly and fairly considered all of the evidence in the Khadr case and determined whether or not and in what sort of amount financial compensation was consistent with Canadian law. We believe the fact that our Conservative government repatriated Mr. Khadr to serve the remaining years of a legally found military court sentence and the new opportunity that he has to make a better life in Canada, redeem himself, if you will, when the victims of Al-Qaeda don't have that opportunity. We believe that his freedom in Canada, his return to Canada, was compensation enough.
Okay, but I don't want to relitigate the case. I'm more curious as to why you decided to air this for an American audience. And I mean, because I was tracking it, Peter, for the last 2 weeks. It was not registering as an issue in the United States. Now, thanks to the Canadian Conservatives, it's becoming an irritant.
Well, it has been. I think it has been. It's been reaching the ears of Americans who are distracted by a good many other issues these days. It was. They became aware when Prime Minister Harper called Mrs. Speer and offered his condolences and his regrets at the way the government had handled this case. It also began to gain attention in the U.S. press when a crowdfunding project was launched to raise money for Mrs. Speer and for Sergeant Morris, the soldier who was also wounded in that grenade attack. And I think that it has gradually penetrated American consciousness. And my intention in writing this article was to make sure that the facts were clearly laid out, and I believe they are.
Well, there's a few things missing, Peter Kent.
Well, tell me what's missing.
The age at which his terrorist father took him out of the country.
No, that's in the article. I made it quite clear there is a debate going on in Canada whether or not Mr. Khadr is a repatriated former child soldier, or is he a former juvenile enemy combatant recognized under the protocols of the Geneva Convention.
Just so we agree, his age at the time of his leaving the country is not in here, nor is the part about his treatment at Guantanamo Bay, which is key to the court judgment.
It is in the article as well. I said that he'd been living and training with the Taliban in Afghanistan for several years with his father, under the guidance of his father, who was a terrorist and a terrorist fundraiser. And I mentioned that the families lived, or were reported to have lived, in Osama bin Laden's compound. I mean, the facts are in there.
It's a little oblique.
No, they are. I did a chronological order, and the point that I made was the government did an end run on the judicial process when it didn't have to.
On that, I agree.
And originally, the Prime Minister tried to slip it by Canadians in the depths of summer. The only reason that Canadians are aware and discussing this, and Americans today, is that a whistleblower somewhere released the financial amount that the Prime Minister wanted to keep from Canadians and from Americans.
Okay, one last question for you, Peter Kent, and I'll let you have your say, but what is the gain for Canada for you amplifying this as an issue for an American audience? What's the gain for us?
Well, the gain is, as I said, respect for not only the Charter of Rights, and we respected the Supreme Court decision in repatriating Mr. Khadr, and we recognize that the foreign governments of Chrétien and Martin were in power when foreign affairs officials violated Mr. Khadr's rights. But we also respect, as I said in the article, our friends and allies in the war against terrorism. And this story, based on the Trudeau government's justification of this massive, unnecessary payout, deserved correction in the U.S. forum.
Peter Kent, thank you very much.
All the best, John.
Always good to talk. Thank you, Peter Kent, MP for Thornhill. The time is 8:24. You can have your say, 416-872-1010.